How's it going, everyone? Mitchen Chicken here. Today, as we approach the end of the Temporal Forces format, I wanted to show you what I think is probably the best deck in a format that has become pretty refined and clear cut of a pretty consistent big three of Chen Pao, Charizard, and Lost Box with a few other decks running around. But that is Pidgeot Control. I picked this deck up just about a week ago and did absolutely incredible with it. In just a week of locals, I won 2 cups and a second place in the Toronto area, which is quite an achievement. I just think the deck is really strong, and obviously, a lot of people are already paying attention to the new Twilight Masquerade set and the format we're going to be getting with that. But as there is still about a week left of locals and even some non-North American majors, like some special events happening, I thought I'd share the deck anyways and my thoughts on it. The deck I played, some changes potentially, things like that. Because I haven't done a video in a bit, and I think this deck is really cool and worth sharing. So to start off, this 60 is one of Olo Blitzel's many renditions of the deck. So it is his original list. I didn't change the one of them that I decided on, but I did pick from quite a few that he had. But you can check him out for many lists and content. But I want to talk about the list specifically that I did play, and also some changes and how I found the cards. That you could choose to play, you could change them, up to you. So let's get into it and I'll show you the list. So we're starting off the deck with the star of the show, Pidgeot EX. We like it for the quick search ability. It lets us play a lot of different one-ofs in the deck and still have a very consistent deck in finding whatever we need whenever we want. And you can actually situationally attack with it as well. For double colorless +3 wind, does 120, and you can discard a stadium. Generally that's going to be 100 with DTE. But you can just remove like a one prizer that's kind of annoying. And a big thing that's actually relevant is Pidgeot's free retreat is very helpful with penny looping certain things in this deck, which I'll touch on a little bit more. So Pidgeot, just everything about it is actually really useful. So we're playing the 2/2 Pidgeot EX and 2 Pidgey, the Call for Family one. And although this is the start of the show, it almost seems like maybe that's not a lot of Pokemon. But trust me, it's a lot more than everything else in this deck. Almost everything else in this deck is like a 1/1 line, or one-of line, whereas Pidgeot is at least a 2/2 line, and it generally tends to be enough. We're only ever really setting up one, and we can heal it if necessary. We can attach tools to make it bigger, and so it works pretty well. Next up, the only other evolution line in this deck is the Wigglytuff EX. We're playing 1/1 Jigglypuff Wigglytuff. Jigglypuff actually has the lead attack, which can be nice in some cases. If you're kind of starting slow, you can attach an energy, use lead, search for a supporter card, which can help you get out of a bad spot. But mainly we're playing for Wigglytuff EX, which has the expanding body ability, which gives it another 100 HP if there's a special energy attached. And Friend Tackle does basically 160 in this deck consistently. It does 90 + 90 if you played a supporter for triple colorless. We're pretty much always going to be having a DTE and always playing a supporter. So for the sake of things, generally this is 160, which is a really good number to deal with one prizers. You can kill things even like Baxcalibur in one attack. Pretty much every one prizer except for the ancient Pokemon with a booster capsule. And 320 after 2 attacks, which kills basically everything 2 prizer wise, except for Charizard, which we don't really use this for in that matchup anyways. So the numbers are actually really good, but the main reason we're using Wigglytuff is because with expanding body, it becomes 350 HP. With Hero's Cape, it becomes 450 HP. So this is just an absolute tank to sit behind that we can actually use to attack if we need to remove threats. And it's a sort of prize trading matchup, while we have multiple turns to punch with this and be annoying with other supporters to disrupt our opponent. Then, for some support Pokemon, we've got the classics of Lumineon and Rotom. Lumineon can just be nice to use Ultra Balls to search it out, to find a supporter to get going in the beginning of the game. Or if we kind of can't waste Quick Search to get a supporter, and we really need like a 2-card combo turn, we can Quick Search for something like an Energy or something else that we might need, and then Lumineon for the supporter we need. So it offers a couple different options there. Rotom is super important in control decks because a lot of the time we're not ending our turns with an attack. We'd normally just be passing. So getting to announce instant charge almost all the time gives us such a huge card advantage and just almost everything we want in hand. And then we can just kind of fix whatever one card we're missing with Quick Search. But a lot of the higher count cards like Nest Balls, we can find our Pokemon easy. We just keep drawing into them with Rotom, which is really good. So Rotom's a huge card in this deck. Then getting into some of the more niche control one-of Pokemon, we've got Cloth EX. This card's really cool. It's mainly for Charizard. The ability is counterattacking Pinsir. When a Pokemon attacks into it, you can discard an energy attached to it. And that's every time they attack into it, even if it gets knocked out. So we can penny loop this to recover the health on it. So they have to keep punching into it if they're trying to do something and keep losing energy. Specifically for Charizard, this is good because they have very few amount of energy. So that's mainly what Cloth is for. I've seen lists in the past that actually put a fighting energy in the deck as well. This one doesn't play it, but you could use Falling Press just to put a little bit of pressure with a Cloth sitting in the active, but you don't really need to. Then I've got Luxray. This card is really good for Fang Snipe. Lets us do 10 damage with a DTE, which isn't really relevant, but the main thing is we get to look at our opponent's hand and discard any trainer card we find there, which is really big because we can even get rid of things like supporters that something like Airy or Fortune Sisters can't target. And that can be really big in slowing our opponent down, or just constantly getting to look at their hand, getting information, discarding important resources. Even if they're items, right, we don't need to play Airy. If Luxray is not being threatened, we can just Fang Snipe for multiple turns and sort of destroy their hand while we attack like their deck with Fortune Sisters, discard the items there, and then Fang Snipe the items in hand. So Luxray is really good in pretty much every matchup if you find the right opportunity to use it. Then we've got Chi-Yu, pretty universal card as well in different matchups. It sort of just depends on the situation. We're playing it for the 1-fire attack Jealously Singe, which discards the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. And with health mods, it can be bumped up, so it's hard to one-shot. And once again, we can penny loop it. And just to explain the term penny looping, if you're unaware, it's basically you use one of these basic Pokemon. A lot of them all attack for like 1 attachment energy, whether it's like double colorless or 1 fire. So you use their attack, they take a hit and ideally live because they have like a charm attached. You play Penny to pick it up. You put all that stuff down in 1 turn because it's a basic, it's only 1 energy attachment, and Pidgeot just free retreats back into it and you do it again. And you can just punish your opponent if they can't really respond. Chi-Yu is really good in cases like that where your opponent's not really playing the game. You can just spam Singe, or if they can't one-shot it, you can just continue to discard cards. You can also catch them at the end of the game if it's an aggressive drawing deck like Lost Box or Ancient Box that sort of needs to rip through their deck to play the game, and they get down to just a couple cards left at the end of the game. You can just Singe to catch them, deck them out, and win the game. Then we've got Mawile for the Tempting Trap attack, which stops the defending Pokemon from retreating. This is better than Snorlax in a deck like this because we're almost always going to have at least one non-Snorlax in play, which is Pidgeot. So they can always just gust around Snorlax and then retreat. Mawile being an attack means that as long as we want to, and they can't knock the Mawile out, we can just keep announcing Tempting Trap, and they can't really get around it. We just choose to keep them in the active, unless they have other cards that can, you know, like Switch, Turo, things like that. So you have to do it in the right scenario. And this is generally for trapping something that doesn't attack, and you know your opponent's kind of out of switching options, so you just stick them in there forever until they deck out. Then we got Radiant Charizard, which is pretty interesting in a deck that is generally meant to be controlling and maybe not taking prize cards. There are certain matchups, generally outside of the big 3 ones, although even within those 3, POW and Lost Box can definitely bring you to situations where they're getting pretty low on their prize cards remaining. They have attackers set up. We can't really control anything, like there's nothing left to stop. They have their board and they're just going to kill us. So when they get to a late game, you can just use Radiant Charizard, attach a fire energy, even hit the opponent with an Iono to disrupt their hand so they don't have much of an answer, and then kill the actual problem, and then go back to controlling. Or you can do penny looping and just sweep with Radzard once they get the 2 prizes. We need to penny Radzard, even if they're not attacking into it, because you can't use Combustion Blast every turn. You need to reset it. But you just spam penny and keep attacking with Radzard, and you can potentially reverse sweep your opponent if you got rid of enough resources. The Iono was strong, and they only had like 1 major threat. You kill that threat, and then you just keep attacking. Then we got Mimikyu. Safeguard ability stops it being attacked from those 2 prize EX and V Pokemon. You can just sit this in the active if your opponent board locks themselves out of an option, if for some reason their deck doesn't play an option to deal with it. You can also just buy time against Charizard. They generally have the Charmeleon or, you know, worst case Charmanders to do some damage to it. But even then, they're not that strong, and they take a while to set up. So you can buy a lot of time just sitting Mimikyu in the active against Charizard, which is really nice. Then I got the Ditto. This is one of the last Pokemon in the list, and something that's potentially more cuttable based on your needs for like your local meta, what you expect to be hitting. The main reason for Ditto is just to copy Mawile's attack. And the reason we use Ditto instead of just using Mawile is, one, Mawile has another attack in Bite, which isn't ever relevant to us, but it does 90 damage and can be copied by something like Mew EX, which is a good Pokemon to trap in the active sometimes. And then the other reason is Mawile is weak to Metal, so you cannot effectively trap Matangs in the active well against Dialga. But with Ditto and Defiance Vest, which if we're behind, we take 40 less, Matangs do 20 damage, there's no weakness, so Ditto can take up to 3 hits before needing to be pennied, and they basically are just trapped forever. So that's what Ditto's for. But if your local metas are a lot of just the big 3 decks right now, like Charizard, Chien-Pao, Lost Box, Ditto's pretty irrelevant because you're never really trapping something like Matang, obviously, is only Dialga, and Mew is a little bit more of like the fringe, like big basic aggro decks mainly. So you don't need to play Ditto. That's definitely a cuttable one. And the last Pokemon in the deck is Cleffa. This one's not really niche matchup-wise. It's more just niche situational. If you happen to struggle to get your Pidgeot up, or it was killed in like the mid game and you can't really establish another one, Cleffa provides another option of free retreat. We play a 1 of Buddy Poffin in the deck, so it lets us search it out like that. If we just Poffin for Pidgey Cleffa because maybe we can't get Rotom, and we can use Grasping Draw to set up. Those are the main 2 reasons. I found Cleffa very rarely useful, so it's not necessary, but it's something that can kind of pad an awkward situation or start. So it can potentially be worth keeping in here. But I could also see it being cut if there's another card you prefer that's not in this list. Then moving on to supporters, we've got a few thick lines, and then the rest of them are just 1-ofs. 4 of Arven is the only 4 of supporter in the deck. Arven's super important because this deck actually plays a lot of tools, so it's nice to search that out. And also items. So an item and a tool are really important for this deck to get going in the first place. You can search things out like Nest Ball Forest, Sealstone, grab Rotom, Alchemy for a Pidgey, Charge, and then ideally with that Charge and the Pidgey down already, we can set up the Pidgeot turn 2. Arven's really important for establishing our initial couple guys of like Pidgey, Rotom, and getting important tools out of the deck just to buy us a couple turns before we've set up and really enacting our game plan. So Arven's really good in the early game. And even sometimes in like the mid to late game, maybe you need a tool and an item, and you have neither in hand and Quick Search can't get them. You can still just Quick Search for Arven and get both, which is always nice. And then the other pretty thick line supporter in this deck is Penny. Penny's super broken. Picks up almost every Pokemon in this deck without any other condition. They don't need to be damaged. They don't need to be of a certain type. And we keep all the cards attached to them. It lets us loop, like heal, and then reuse a whole bunch of the different annoying Pokemon in this deck, like Radiant Charizard, Mimikyu, Luxray, Cloth, Chi-Yu. It's really versatile to also just move things when we want them out of the active. Penny's a great supporter in this deck. Then going into 1-ofs. First off, I got Sharon's Care. This is strictly to pick up the evolving colorless Pokemon. You'll notice that all the Pokemon that do evolve in this deck are colorless. So, and they're also bigger. So they can generally take a hit or 2, but we don't really want them to die, especially our Pidgeot, right? If our opponent boss punches that, we retreat it. We don't really want it to get boss punched again and killed. So we can do things like Sharon's Care, pick it up to deny those prizes. And your opponent's also wasting the boss, especially on Pidgeot, because now we've just cleaned it off, and it's good to keep our Pidgeot alive. That's the main reason for Sharon's Care. Then I'll do these 2 together, Misfortune Sisters and Airy. One targets the items in the hand, the other targets the items tucked away in the deck. So you have options to discard important item resources from your opponent, regardless of where you think they might be. If you have a good read that they're in hand, you can Airy. Otherwise, you just keep spamming Sisters if you're trying to dig for options they might be trying to conceal away in the deck, like switches or, you know, any other important resource, really. Then a couple different utility supporters. Got Boss's Orders, Iono, and Thornton. Boss is pretty self-explanatory. We want Gust unconditionally, and it's something we can recover a bit easier because it's a supporter, so we can Pal Pat it back. We do play a bunch of counter catchers in this deck, but sometimes we're not behind or even ahead if we're trying to take a couple early prizes to make things awkward for our opponent. So Boss is good there. And Iono can be situationally good if our opponent's also built a massive hand and we don't like that in the late game. We want to do something like reverse sweep them with Radzard, and we can Iono them to nothing and then start attacking them and really put the pressure on them. And it can also just be good as like, you know, if we really need a fresh new hand and our hand's pretty awkward, sometimes we can find Iono and just rip it. And Thornton is kind of an interesting one. Thornton's another card that is sort of niche. You don't necessarily need it. There's a couple cool things you can do with it, though. If you want a Pokemon from the discard pile back immediately and you don't necessarily have multiple card options for it, like a Rod and then Nest Ball it back, Something you can do is Lumineon for Thornton, and then just Thornton to remove Lumineon and get that Pokemon out of the discard you want instead. Another thing is recovering an immediate attacker like Radiant Charizard. Maybe our opponent's at 2, we used Radzard, they killed it, they go to 1, we Thornton it back again immediately. It's mainly just for ease of recovering a basic Pokemon, essentially. That's Thornton's main job. But they're generally used through like Lumineon to get something back, or to just get like Charizard back immediately. One other thing you can do is you can, if you discard Ditto early, and then you can like bench Mawile and Thornton, switch them out, so Mawile gets in discard and recovering Ditto simultaneously. Do like a 2-for-1. So yeah, that's Thornton. Then we've got our last supporters. These are the recovery supporters. We got Silene and Yelschir. Yelschir lets us shuffle 3 in any combination of Pokemon and supporter cards back from our discard pile. A lot of people forget about the Pokemon option, so if you don't actually have that many supporters you need back, and you do have a relevant Pokemon you'd like back, instead of having to dig for your Super Rod, you can play Yelschir and get both back, which is good. And Silene, flip 2 coins, put number of cards of heads you get there on top of your deck. So Silene can recover anything, but it is pretty hard to get much back. Generally, it's just going to be 1 card. And usually we're having to use these cards in tandem with each other to infinitely deck out and infinitely reuse our supporters if necessary. But you can still use Silene to get anything at the end of the day if you flip enough heads. Then we've got Ball Search. These are pretty self-explanatory. 3 Nest Ball to get a bunch of our basics out. 3 Ultra Balls. These are obviously for more Pokemon search. It lets us find the evolved Pokemon like Pidgeot easier, so that we can try and ensure our turn 2 Pidgeot as consistently as possible. And it also lets us act as a early game setup through Lumineon for a supporter that's important if our hand kind of sucks. We've got Ultra Balls to search for fish, for Arven to get into the game. So those are pretty good. Then in a deck with this many one of supporters, and also being a control deck, we want to make sure we're never decking out. We've got plenty of supporter recovery option. So 3 Pal Pads just to get back all the supporters when we need them. We've got 3 Counter Catcher, because the deck is usually going to be behind. If we're not attacking, we're just going to be staying at 6 prizes the whole game. So it lets us be able to gust annoying things up and still play another supporter in the same turn. So Counter Catcher is obviously pretty good for that, as a deck that's almost always going to be behind in most cases. 2 Rare Candy just for our Pidgeots. We don't have any other stage 2, so we don't need much of a thicker line. It's pretty rare that we'd prize both of them, and you can always even recover it with Silene if you need to. 2 is really nice as well, because you can go like Candy Pidgeot, and assuming you prize none of them, you can do things like Sharon and then still Candy that same Pidgeot back down. Then I've got the 1 of Buddy Poffin that I mentioned. This is something that's nice if you're going to play like an Arven for a search card. Instead of having to get a Nest Ball, you can actually get a 2-for-1 basically. There aren't a lot of under 70 HP Pokemon in the deck, that's why we just play the 1 Poffin. But you can get Pidgey and something, which generally is Pidgey and Mimikyu, or Pidgey and Jigglypuff. It's a Jigglypuff relevant matchup. Sometimes Cleffa as well if something like Rotom's prized and we've got an awkward board and we really need to draw some cards to get going. 1 of Super Rod to get back our few basic energies, as well as just easily and reliably recover a bunch of our 1 of Pokemon if we happen to discard it, or it did get knocked out, and we can get it back and reuse it. Lost Vacuum, good utility for removing any annoying tools, specifically ACE SPECs. Maybe something like Max Belt is kind of problematic for us, and we want to just get rid of that to deny our opponents the damage mod and bring their numbers back into a comfortable range for us that we can handle, and just take a hit and penny loop so we're not worried about getting O-code. Heavy Ball, because we're playing a lot of 1 of basic Pokemon, and Heavy Ball really unlocks the prizes for us since we don't have something like Peonia to reliably get a bunch of stuff out of the prizes. Most things that are prized are stuck there if we're not taking prizes, but Heavy Ball at least ensures that we can get our Pokemon out of there. Then, for the tools, Rescue Board's a bit of a niche one. It lets us get a movement option through Arven, which is the main reason I like it. If you start any of the 1 retreat Pokemon, Mimikyu, and then like a lot of the other guys, Mawile, Rotom, Lumineon, Chiyu, Ditto. There's a lot of different things. You can just move it out of the way, so you don't have to penny that turn, and you want to start playing the game having to go Arven, then penny, waste an extra turn. So if you really want to just get moving, Rescue Board's there. But it's not a necessary card, I found. I didn't use it a whole ton. Then we've got our health mods. We've got 2 Bravery Charm. These are the pretty general tools we're going to be sticking on a lot of the basic guys because they only buff basic. 50 HP is quite a bit. Moving up something like a low 200 up to the mid 200s is really powerful. And Swings number is a big deal in terms of actually getting O-code. It makes it really hard for opponents to knock them out in most cases. So those are pretty good. Then running out of space here, this deck, you'll notice, has a ton of 1-ofs and is almost hard to fit in a deck profile. We've got our ACE SPEC of choice. It's always going to be Hero's Cape, plus 100 HP to anything as well, is just so good. We're generally going to be sticking that on Pidgeot or Wigglytuff, but if you're going to be penny looping anyways and you're not worried about a lost vacuum, you can kind of just stick it on anything. You can always stick it on the basics and then you're just penning it up anyways, so you're not losing it. You can do things like stick it on a basic for a turn just because you don't have a Bravery Charm. And then when you penny it, move the Hero's Cape to the Pidgeot. Now you can get your charm and put the charm on the basic. Cool things like that. The Hero's Cape is just really good for more health, denying prizes. 1 of 4 Sealstone, generally going to be stuck on Rotom V in the early game to help us set up, just to establish that turn 2 Pidgeot as fast as possible. And then from there, we've kind of got a search for one card we want every turn, so it's not as needed, but it's really important in the early game. Defiance Vest, which is kind of just a control health mod. This is pretty good for trapping Pokemon that already do relatively low damage. So you take 40 less damage when you're behind. If something like a Bibarel or a Matang, they kind of do some damage, but they don't do a ton. Defiance Vest, taking 40 less every attack, can actually make much more of an impact than something like Bravery Charm buffing just 50 HP. If we're taking 40 less every turn, and it's going to require them to take so many more attacks to get there, then Defiance Vest is a lot more worth it in that scenario. And then finally, just a few energies. This deck does not play very many. So it's going to be 2 basic fire, 2 double colorless, 2 DTE, I should say, for the double colorless attacks, and 1 mist energy. The 2 fires are the basic energy of choice because we play both Chi-Yu and Radiant Charizard, which are nice cards. So basic energy there work well, but you can also stick this on Wigglytuff as a triple colorless option. We're going to go fire or mist and the DTE. But fire is the main reason for the basic energy as opposed to any other kind of color like lightning. We're not really using Luxray's attack, but Chi-Yu and Radzard are super good. Then the DTEs, just to, like I said, pay for those double colorless options. We can use Blustery Wind in a pinch if we need to. It pays for Luxray. We can use DTE and a fire energy to attack with Radzard earlier. Things like that. So those are pretty good. And then 1 of Mist Energy. The Mist Energy is pretty good instead of just a 3rd fire because it prevents effects of attack. So we can stop things that normally would OHKO, like Frenzied Gouging from Roaring Moon or a Star Requiem from Giratina that could just go through all of our massive HP, like our 450 HP Wigglytuff. We don't really want that guy getting OHKO'd, so Mist Energy can stop that. We can also stick Mist Energy on Pidgeot in a deck that we suspect, or maybe we found out, we now see the card, that they play Devolution. In an awkward hand that does not have the cards to just search out a rare candy again, getting our Pidgeot Devoed can actually be pretty bad. So Mist Energy can kind of just stop that if we're trying to be heads up about that threat or actually know that our opponent's playing it. Mist can be good there. So that's the deck. If you have any locals left, like challenges or cups, you're really trying to grind for those last few points before NAIC in this format, I really recommend picking up the deck. I learned it in a week and did phenomenal with it in a format that I was not really clicking with much and not doing very well up to my expectations. So I think it's really good. Like I said earlier, check out All Out Blitzel as well for different lists that you might want to change some cards around. Some of the ones I mentioned I personally didn't find. You might find something that's a little bit more useful for some more fringe matchups that you're finding in your local meta. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Check out the deck. Let me know what you think in the comments below and subscribe for more videos. I'll see you in the next one. Later.